to questions of City Council. And first up, we have Councilman Cashman.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a few questions on the East Central Area Plan, of course, and NPI in general. So for planning, anyone who's got the answer, how many homes are in the Ecap area? And I'd love if you know owned as opposed to rentals. Kurt?
Yeah, so I think there is about 50,000 residents in the East Central area. I think that translates to, this is off the top of my head, I can double check these, but about 30 to 40,000 housing units. A big majority of those are renter households. I don't know, Scott, if you have that number accessible.
Yeah, I can get it in just a second. There's about 32,000 households in East Central, and I will have the renter number for you.
Did you say 32,000, Scott?
Yes, 32,000.
Thank you. What I'm wondering while Scott's looking that up, did you do a mass mailing to every address in the district, in the study area?
We did not. No, we decided that our outreach resources were better used on more targeted flyering, pop-up events, and those kind of other activities rather than a mailer. Okay.
Can you talk about the diversity or lack of it of the steering committee?
So that's been a challenge in really many of our planning processes, and East Central is no different. When those committee members were appointed by the council members, the previous two council members, I think they tried in earnest to appoint a diverse committee. So there are a number of different points of view on the committee. There's people who represent small businesses, such as the business improvement districts. RNOs are represented. There were development interests represented on the steering committee. And then from different walks of life, we had social services workers who are, that's what they did for their day job, all the way to, bid executive director in the case of Frank. And yeah.
How large was the committee? Remind me again, please.
So it shrank by a couple members, but by the end of the process, there was 12 members.
And so were there any representatives from communities of color?
There was one steering committee representative who was non-white at the end of the process. There was another one at the beginning of the process, but she had to drop out because of other commitments.
Okay, thank you for that. Other question, I have two more, Madam President, if you don't mind. I'm wondering, how are height incentives working around town? Are they successful? Have they met expectations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think our point of view in CPD is that there were lessons learned from the recent pilot at the 38th and Blake station, where that project moved forward, and we are underway now. There's the affordable housing zoning incentive projects that's looking at that pilot, lessons learned, ways we can improve upon that, and also looking at all the other cities that are using zoning as a tool for more affordable housing to try to maximize those community benefits.
So does this plan allow for implementation of those lessons learned down the road?
Yes, it recommends that we look at all those lessons and we improve upon that zoning based affordable housing incentive program in a way that sort of informs the regulatory process that's just been kicked off.
Okay, and I guess the last question I have, and I'm trying to reach for the right word. I don't mean to be too cynical, but have we been successful, or where have we been successful in halting displacement?
Well, I mean, it's a big topic and a big priority. I mean, I think what we can do in a plan is articulate the goal of reducing and using all of the tools we have at our disposal to prevent involuntary displacement, including new and innovative tools that we aren't yet existing. And that includes zoning, which oftentimes creates, very intense opinions on how to use zoning for some of these goals. And so what we have said is that we need sort of this all hands on deck approach to try to address this problem of not only residential displacement, which is a huge concern, but also small business displacement, which is also a huge concern, especially in the East Central area, where almost 80% of the businesses are small, locally owned mom and pops. And so we've had to think outside the box and create some creative strategies to try to address that issue as well. Yeah.
Okay. And Scott, I had asked about rental as opposed to ownership, if you have that.
Yeah, about 70% of households in East Central are renter occupied. So that's
Okay. And do you have quantity of businesses in the study area?
Yes, we do have that somewhere. I can find that number for you as well.
All right. Well, I'll say thank you, Madam President, and Scott, if you can get us that whenever you find it.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Cashman. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks, Madam President, and thanks for the presentation, CPD. Just a couple questions. In your beginning remarks, Kurt, I think you said there were 3,500 participants and 10,000 comments. But on slide, I think it was 23, it said there were only 300 commenters.
Right.
Okay.
So the larger number at the beginning, the 3,500 participants, those were people who participated throughout the 3 years. So at all of our workshops and events and community meetings, the 300 number was just a few months at the end of the process when all of the information was compiled into the draft plan document and people weighed in on those specifics, wording, and the details of the plan document, where we received several thousand comments from 300 participants in that process.
And of the 3,500 participants over 3 years, were those 3,500 unique participants?
Yeah, so we call that touch points. So we did our best to try to weed out duplicative participants, but so that's an estimate, but yeah, it's about 3,500 unique participants.
And do you know the demographics of those people and what neighborhoods they came from? And
yeah, so we did track those demographics. Racially, the participants in our plan are generally consistent with the census demographics within a few percentage points of the East Central area. And as I mentioned before, the largest underrepresented group throughout the process were younger, lower income renters, which is why we disproportionately adjusted our resources, again, through that equity lens to try to target more participation from that underrepresented group where we saw the largest disparity.
okay, and we heard from, I think, one RNO tonight who does not support it. Do you have support of other RNOs?
Yeah, so you also heard from Chun, Capitol Hill United Neighbors. That's a RNO. They support the plan. There are others that other RNOs that didn't take an official vote on the plan because I don't know why, but I don't know if they got to complete consensus, especially when you're talking about some of these recommendations around zoning and density and building heights. People have very strong opinions. You know, there's over 50 recommendations, policy recommendations in the plan. And when we originally released those recommendations over a year ago, and we did it in survey form and asked people how they felt about those recommendations. And nearly all of those recommendations had very strong support, over 70% support, with the exception of the recommendations that had to do with building height and density, where those recommendations were more like 60-40 or 55-50, or more mixed opinion. And people just have very strong opinions about that topic.
So of all the RNOs you heard from, there was just one that was in favor of it and one that was officially opposed?
I believe that's right. Yes.
Okay. And on, I think one of the slides said the steering committee, there were several members of the steering committee who didn't support it. What were their reasons?
Well, the final vote, the vote of the plan at the steering committee was 7 in favor and 2 against. One of those members, Miles, provided his comments tonight in his remarks. And I think I won't speak for him, but he has some questions about the process. And oftentimes it's a hard technical concept to explain. And we run into this in many of our plans, is the difference between a planning document, which is really a guide that articulates a long-term outcome and outlines some policies to achieve those outcomes, versus the very specific regulatory language that lives in zoning, or the very specific designs of infrastructure, and those happen in later processes. And the difference between a plan document and those details has created some discomfort among some members. And I think Miles, I could safely say, it was one of the people who are uncomfortable with that. And then the other member who was concerned about the plan, I think it echoed some of the concerns that we've heard from residents just regarding the impacts of potential density in the East Central area. And those could include, street parking issues and traffic issues.
Okay, I just have one final question. So there are other efforts of CPD happening now and will be happening in the future. And I'm wondering if you discussed that during your efforts. I know when the Far Northeast plan happened, which was met with much love and celebration. So we didn't have any of this controversy when that was brought to us. But they didn't talk about ADUs or group living or residential infill or, changing single unit zoning to duplex and triplex. Did you talk about all those things during this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we learned early on in the process that we could not ignore, we had to have a strong emphasis on the affordable housing shortage in the East Central area. I could pull up some of the numbers, but they were pretty mind-boggling when we started looking at the data that we had about over 11,000 households in the East Central area were cost burden, which is over a third of all the households submitting they're struggling to pay their rent or their mortgage. There was also a shortage of affordable units at the lower income levels of over 3,000. We calculated through one of our consultants, for the first time I've seen in an area plan, the specific number of low income units that we were short, which is over 3,000, and we made that public. We say we have this huge problem. We also looked at all of the current today income restricted units in the area, and we found out that almost half, about 46% of those current income restricted units, or 1,400 units, were going to expire over the next 10 years and potentially come back on the market as market rate units, and therefore lose their affordability protections for people. So we knew early on that we had to do something pretty specific and serious, and we could not avoid some of these really difficult conversations about how we were going to fill that affordable housing shortage.
But did you specifically talk about these other efforts that are happening concurrently and plan for the future?
And by that, do you mean the missing middle infill housing options, the affordable housing zoning incentive project? We did talk about those two concurrent efforts, if that's what you mean.
Yes, and group living and residential infill.
Yeah, so the missing middle housing options is the residential infill program. We talked quite a bit about that. That was one of the topics that generated those strong opinions. We didn't talk so much about the group living project, even though those questions came up. We were pretty far into our process when that process started. We were already on year 3 when the group living proposal came out. But we did answer many questions about how that project might intersect and interrelate with these plans.
So is addressing the missing middle the idea that single unit zoning would be replaced with duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes?
Yeah, so it's looking at some of our lower density areas and trying to figure out what is the best, most thoughtful way to introduce new housing options that are more affordable particularly for middle income people. And so that, how would we might integrate duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes? The East Central area is almost entirely not single unit today. So it's almost entirely apartments, row homes, duplexes. There's only a few blocks, basically the southern portion of one of the neighborhood statistical areas in Congress Park, and then the northern 2 blocks of City Park West are really the only single unit areas. And even those areas have some of the missing middle housing in there already. So it wasn't as big of an issue generally in the East Central area as in terms of a topic as in some of our other plan areas like the East area. But it did have very strong opinions in those portions of the plan area.
Okay, I know I said that was my last question, but I just have a follow-up to that. So I've yet to see any new development in Denver or Inglewood, which is right next to my district, where this is happening, where their duplexes or triplexes or slot homes have gone up on what was formerly a single unit dwelling, where the new dwellings aren't much more expensive than the original house that was there. So I'd like to see some kind of evidence that that is going to result in that missing middle housing. There's an entire statistical neighborhood in my district, University Hills, where they're tearing down what were very modest homes, and you'll see slot homes or duplexes that are $600,000-$800,000, which are not affordable. And that's what I'm seeing in Englewood right next door. And we've all seen it a lot up in Amanda Sandoval's district. So for a future discussion, but thank you for answering my question. Sorry, I went on so long, Madam President.
I'll just make one quick point because that's an important point. I think we definitely agree with that point of view, Councilwoman Black. We heard that point of view throughout our process. And so we've crafted that recommendation to be very focused on not encouraging demolition and redevelopment of those homes, but rather repurposing some of those homes as duplexes. And I think that's why you see some support from Historic Denver, for example, for some of these recommendations, because we're taking more of a preservation approach to that integration of housing.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Black. Councilwoman Seda Baca.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the questions Councilwoman Black and Councilman Cashman were asking about guaranteeing this affordability and this missing middle that we need. We have multiple plans across the city that have tried to address equity and affordability. And when it comes down to a rezoning, what we've found is that our plans don't guarantee any kind of movement on our goals. And so can you guys tell me how you've fashioned this to be different than any of the other plans we're using that are not yielding any results?
Well, so I think for the missing middle housing options in particular, what we recommended, again, was to try to get away from the consequence of scraping existing bungalows, for example, and then putting up larger duplexes, for example. And so we've explicitly said that that's not the outcome that we're intending with this. And we've crafted the recommendation to say that those homes should be preserved instead of redeveloped and creating larger footprints. I mean, some of the ideas around missing middle is that in general, smaller square footages are more affordable than larger square footages. And so obviously, there's prices rise in single unit areas very quickly as well. And so we're trying to address that issue in some of these neighborhoods. What's different also, I'll say, about the density approach in the East Central area, and this is particularly along Colfax and our transit corridors that we're recommending, is what we would typically do in a plan like this, where we're planning a high capacity transit facility or BRT along Colfax, is we would automatically allow more housing to be built near those transit stations. So that's a planning practice called TOD, or transit oriented development, that's been used in Denver, that's been used in almost every city that has high capacity transit, both nationally and internationally, as a way to improve carbon pollution, to lower air pollution, to manage traffic better, to allow people to reduce transportation costs. And so that has been the standard that we've used. However, we took a different approach in the East Central area, in part due to the number of shortage of affordable housing units that we researched at the beginning of this process. And what we've said is you do not get any additional units, even near our transit stops, unless you provide community benefits, with the top priority being affordable income restricted units. So that's a different approach than we normally would take, and what cities around the world would normally take when you're planning a high capacity transit route. So while we don't use the word guarantee because the city does not itself build affordable housing, we invest in affordable housing, we create policies to encourage and incentivize affordable housing, but we have shifted those policies to say, if you want more, then you have to do more and provide those community benefits, and affordable housing being one of them.
So the issue here, I think, is, if you split a historic home, or you reuse a single family home and make it a duplex, there's nobody saying that in order to do that, you must charge an affordable amount for rent. In fact, they can charge really whatever the market will allow them to charge, and can say you're in a historic home, so that makes it even more valuable. And so I'm wondering, with that and with TOD development, knowing that TOD development has really backfired on us, are we pushing growth in an area without recognizing what causes displacement? When we talk about displacement, it happens because we increase the value of an area for speculators, for developers, for landowners. When we increase the value of the area, because we allow more things to be built, we allow more profit to be generated, taxes go up and push people out and cause displacement. And so I'm wondering, when we say the city doesn't do affordable housing, how have we fed into displacement with the plans and the way that we drive growth? Have you guys analyzed the growth after we've created a plan in an area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a insightful question. It's definitely a complicated answer, and it's something that I think all cities that are growing especially are trying to address. There's the many factors that we find that contribute to displacement and gentrification. There are some neighborhoods that don't see a lot of development that have rising prices, and there are some neighborhoods that have development that also see rising prices, and vice versa. So it's not just as simple as development causes displacement, according to the data that we've seen. What we do know is, from examples like San Francisco, is that when you severely restrict the supply of housing while the city is growing and more people are moving to it, that prices tend to rise very rapidly. And so the thinking around density is, where can we place density where people can benefit from infrastructure like transit, like parks and community services, so that people have a higher quality of life and that we can manage pollution and carbon emissions in a more appropriate way. And what we've said in this plan is that we should couple those strategies for strategic growth with our affordable housing tools. So included in that missing middle recommendation, which is the infill housing options of duplexes and triplexes and row homes, we've said that we should couple that recommendation with affordable housing tools, such as the pilot study on the west side, looking at ADUs and creating incentives again for residents who want to become their own developer and develop their own properties, and how we can partner with them through other organizations to keep those rents at a reasonable level, and using some of that same thinking and that pilot on the west side in this missing middle housing recommendations. And that's part of the East Central policy recommendation as well.
And so my last question, with respect to affordable housing, we got really close to being explicit about what we expect to see from development when we said that height would only be allowed for, originally it was for affordable housing. And then we softened up on that language to say that height would be allowed for a substantial community benefit. And we didn't set in stone what a community benefit meant. We just gave some examples. Can you explain to me why we softened up on that language, why we backed up, and what could be the unintended consequences of backing up?
Yeah, I also think that's a really great question. So yes, we did not limit community benefits only to affordable housing. However, we did say clearly that affordable housing is the top priority through this process. Remember, one thing to remember is that this is a long-term plan. It must be a long-term plan. And so it's looking out 20 years. And the hope anyways is that 20 years from now, we won't always be in an affordable housing crisis. And so we did put on some additional community benefits. One being that you heard tonight was the issue of small locally owned businesses being displaced. And so that is an issue that we don't really have many policy tools. The Denver doesn't, most cities don't. And so we had to think about how we could look at that issue through these creative solutions of using zoning and entitlements. And so we put on the table affordable business space as a way to incentivize that outcome that we heard from the community. And that's particularly important along corridors like Colfax, where again, more than 75% of those businesses are small, locally owned independents. So for that reason, we did broaden that recommendation to look at businesses and as well as other things that are in short supply in certain areas. So if there's a food desert, we have said that an affordable grocery store, and we were specific about saying affordable grocery stores and affordable daycares where those essential services are needed, where there's accessibility issues. We also clarified, I think, to your concern, Councilwoman Sitabaca, about those details not yet being decided upon, and that's correct. And so we've clarified that those entitlements, that additional height or density cannot be granted until council has decided upon those community benefits and those details are figured out.
So you're committing that council will get to decide what appropriate community benefits are before CPD makes a recommendation to approve a rezoning on Colfax.
Yeah, that's what's written in the recommendation.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. Up next, we have Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. I've got a couple of questions. Some are somewhat along the lines of others, but I'm going to start with a different set that has not been asked. So first of all, this is probably for you, Kurt. So can you tell me if the same level of outreach was done in all areas? And was there any concerted effort made in areas that were more predominantly minority, both African American and Latino?
Yeah, so we did, intentionally hold community events and workshops geographically dispersed in every single neighborhood throughout the 3-year process. As I mentioned previously, we did shift our resources to do disproportionate outreach to those underrepresented groups that contained, the demographics that were that had the disparities. So that was younger, lower income renters in the neighborhoods like Capitol Hill. In terms of your question about racial demographics, the East Central area, while there is some diversity in the East Central area, I believe, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, the percentage of non-white residents in the East Central area is, I think, 20 or 30% somewhere. Is that correct, Scott?
It's about 22%.
Right, and it's pretty widely distributed. I mean, there's no obvious location in the East Central area where there's a concentration of people of color. That said, we did try to do outreach to places that are, historically more diverse in terms of their destinations. So schools, recreation centers. We target our outreach at places where communities gather. We, as was mentioned previously, we did outreach directly to people who've been marginalized, such as people experiencing homelessness. We did pop-up events at bus stops and other locations. So we didn't make an effort to try to diversify who we were hearing from. And in the final percentages of plan participants versus the census demographics of the East Central area was generally consistent in terms of the percentage of non-white participants.
So are you familiar with a Title VI complaint that's been filed about outreach to, I believe it's more concentrated on the Spanish-speaking population within the boundaries?
So there was a Title VI complaint, which is the term used in the federal statute, because the portion of this planning process received federal funds. That went to the Federal Transit Administration. That's the entity that was the grantor. And that was several months ago. And the complaint in that email that was sent to them was that we did not do a mailer as part of our notification process, whereas we did do a mailer in another plan area. And that was the complaint, is that was an unfair process that we had. And so we did have a discussion about that. We did evaluate it. We did respond to that complaint to the person and explained why we did what we did. And we found that there was not any kind of violation. Both RTD, which is the overseer of the federal grant that we had, as well as the FTA, we did not find that there was any Title VI issue with that notification question. We have heard.
Just to be clear, let me clarify one point.
Yeah.
Was the grant isolated to just specific conversations around the transportation part of the plan, or was it isolated to the BRT? And so my next question after you answer that will be, how did the BRT fold into the plan? All the work that's been going on with that into the
Sure. So to your first part of the question, no, the grant was used for all the topics in the plan. So urban design, historic preservation, et cetera. It wasn't just focused on BRT or the Colfax corridor. However, because it was the Federal Transit Administration who was the grantor, the Federal Transit Administration is also looking at Colfax to be an investor in that Colfax bus rapid transit. And so part of the reason that they give out these grants is to make sure that the land use and other issues like affordable housing are addressed and planned for ahead of that infrastructure, which is why we decided as a city to move forward with the East Central and the East area plans ahead of some other parts of the city, because we wanted to make sure that we were being proactive and helping to guide that change that could occur from a huge infrastructure investment like BRT along Colfax, and making sure that we're trying to guide those changes in an equitable way possible. And so that's kind of how that fits in is, we looked at what the impacts of that infrastructure may have and try to create strategies and policies so that the community benefits from that infrastructure. And we try to minimize any unintended consequences.
So who specifically responded from the city of Denver to the complaint that was filed? And was that submitted to the RTA?
Yeah, I think it was submitted to FTA,
sorry.
Yeah, the Federal Transit Administration. Federal Transit Administration said that the city and RTD, being the grantees, should be the one to respond. And so I don't know the exact staff person that responded, but we sent a variety of emails related to this issue of mailer notification to those who are complaining about it.
Okay, so one of the questions I asked during our budget process is, who is our Title VI person in the city of Denver? The airport used to have one. We used to have one in the city attorney's office. I don't know that we do have one now, so that's part of why I was asking who responded. And I guess I want to see if our city attorney is on to see if we do have a Title VI point person in the city attorney's office, as we did before. Nate, if you're on, would you mind chiming in? And then I'll jump back to you, Kurt, with some other questions.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get Nate promoted up into the panelists.
And Nate, I'm assuming you're the right person to answer this question. It may need to get bumped above your head, but thought you might know, since so many of these end up being interface with land use and transportation. I don't see him in our queue.
Not yet.
I can just say while we find Nate, in this specific instance, I think your question, Councilwoman Ortega, is a little broader, but in this specific instance, because we were a federal grantee, that RTD is the designated recipient of federal funds from Federal Transit Administration. So it's really their purview and their role in this instance to be the compliance person for Title VI.
Okay, but we were for responding. But that doesn't answer the question about who our point person is. And if we get Nate in, we can maybe plug him in. If I can just continue with a couple more of my questions with Kurt, do you mind if we move in that direction, Madam President?
We can, and I'm getting information here that right now, you know what, I think we have Sky Stewart in our panel, so I'm going to go ahead and let Sky
answer. If Sky can answer that question, that would be great.
About Title VI.
Okay.
Sure. Hi, Sky Stewart, Mayor's Office. Councilwoman, we do not have someone assigned in the city attorney's office to that role. It's something that we are talking about. You raised this question during budget hearings, and we're working through who is the most appropriate person. It's something that HRCP has talked about taking on in the past, but we don't have it officially assigned there. So following up on your question, we're working to get that assigned.
Okay.
But it is not someone assigned in the city attorney's office currently.
Okay. Thank you for answering that, Sky. All right, proceed with my other questions. So when we look at the height recommendations that are in the document, you know, obviously there are areas that are much higher densities than what exists today. And I want to know if any of the conversation looked at sort of maintaining a floor. And this is very different from what the 38th and Blake looked at. I mean, they looked at raising the density, and then anything above that would be, you know, that included affordability could go higher. And if we use today's zoning as the floor, and obviously, you know, the change of the plan doesn't automatically rezone the properties, but if we looked at setting a floor differently than what we did at 38th and Blake, and then people who want to go up to the levels that are spelled out in the plan could rezone, but it would require the contribution of affordability. Was that part of the discussion at all?
So that gets to sort of the issue that has been raised in our planning process of like those very specific details, and that specific question about I think what you're talking about is the base height that we call
Right.
it, or the floor.
Right.
That's part of the conversation that's going on right now with the affordable housing zoning incentive project in the regulatory process. What we've recommended as a policy in the East Central plan is we didn't answer that specific question, but what we did say is that if you want to go beyond what you have today, you have to provide community benefits, with affordable housing being the top priority. In terms of where that exact base will go, that question specifically will be answered by that affordable housing zoning incentive project.
And that will create a base for the overall area, or will it be a case-by-case situation where the base is set?
I think the goal is to create a consistent approach throughout the city, and not just a case-by-case decision.
Okay, I think that's probably going to be much easier to apply if it's done that way. You know, the other thing I just want to share is that we have seen that where we have encouraged higher densities, it hasn't equaled affordability. And until we put the right levers in place, and they're not always necessarily incentives, but where we have the right levers, that's where we're going to start to see affordability. Because I mean, you could look at the Rhino area, you could look at downtown, you could look at almost any area of our city, any of our TOD locations. You know, it's not generally where they're affordable projects. You know, some of them have incorporated some affordability, but not by and large. So can you Nest played a role in giving input into addressing some of the displacement concerns or recommendations that could have folded into the plan, and how was that incorporated?
Absolutely, yeah. Irene and her team in Nest, we formed an interdepartmental working group. They've been a great partner in looking at our affordable housing recommendations and our anti-displacement recommendations, along with other staff and hosts and Dito and others. And absolutely, I mean, the neighborhoods in East Central are not one of the Nest target areas, but in another project that we're working on in the East Colfax neighborhood, that is one of their target areas. And so we were having those discussions simultaneously with the same question about how we're going to, you know, get innovative and do everything we can to look at this displacement issue. And so our recommendations were developed in partnership with Nest and other staff members.
And did that apply both to residential as well as businesses?
Yes.
Displacement issue? Okay, thank you. Can you tell me if the issue of connectivity was part of the discussion, so that where we're including or asking any of the development to include affordability, that we're ensuring that connectivity to the internet, whether it's through Comcast or CenturyLink or whatever, is not a leave behind barrier for certain communities. And you know, we've seen this played out in COVID with you know, kids having to work from home and not having the internet, and having to be sent home either with by our libraries with hotspots or other ways to ensure that you know, lower income children are not being left behind in their education. So did that come up as part of the conversation? I didn't cover it all, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it didn't come up in terms of like those community benefits that we're talking about, which were more a little broader than that. But what we did have as part of our sort of long-term vision statement and outcomes was this idea of having free high-speed internet service in community spaces whether that's, you know, the rec centers and libraries, even parks and plaza spaces. And so that concept is in the plan.
Okay, but it didn't come up as part of the actual developments that may be going in if they're new development, new projects that take advantage of some of the density opportunities.
No, not that level
Okay.
of
Okay.
specificity.
And then just one last question, jumping back to the BRT. Were any of the details that have come out of the whole BRT planning effort incorporated into the East Central Area Plan? And can you just sort of highlight where that's at? Is that in the transportation section? Trying to pull up the
Yeah. So really in two places, we have a whole section of the plan called the Colfax Corridor section, where that linkage between BRT and the plan is articulated. Also, because we received extra grant funding through this project, we hired 2 planners in the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to work exclusively on the East Central Plan and East Area Plan. And so they provided that close coordination with the BRT team throughout the process.
So that got folded in then into the East Central Area Plan. Okay, if you could maybe highlight where I find that in the document. Is it in the transportation, the transit part of it?
So if you look at the Colfax Corridor section of the plan, you'll see the BRT stops and a lot of thinking around the land use changes that we've contemplated near those stops. It's kind of sprinkled in many sections of the plan. I mean, the BRT is such a big project. That's how we, for example, the height recommendations along Colfax were considered, you know, their proximity to BRT stops. Many of the improvements that we've recommended for mobility in the mobility section, where we're connecting bike lanes and crossings and pedestrian improvements, are those station locations were looked at as connections to those as sort of nodes or little hubs along Colfax. So the concept of BRT was really integral into many elements and topics throughout the plan.
Those were extracted from the BRT plan into this plan. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little of both, right? So the recommendations in the East Central plan are informing the BRT plan, which is now in the design phase, and everything done ahead of that informed the East Central plan.
Okay, I think that's the end of my questions for right now. So thank you, Madam President. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilwoman. And we do have Nate Lucero up in the queue. And so just wanted, I know, Nate, you had your hand raised. Wanted to give you an opportunity if you had something to weigh in on the Title VI issue.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't have anything in addition to what Sky has already said. Thank you, though.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Nate. Next up, we have Councilman Hines.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Upton, I have some questions for you. I want to start on civil rights. As you may know, civil rights are the reason why I am an elected official today. And any sort of civil rights complaint is concerning to me. You know, the reason I'm an elected official is because my interest in protecting the civil rights of working for people with disabilities. So I guess I just want to, in addition to, you know, what Councilmember Ortega had mentioned, have you gotten anything from RTD lately saying that the Title VI investigation is open or closed, or what the status is?
Yeah, we've heard some sort of rumors in the community that that this was done, but we've been checking in with RTD, and they have consistently said no. There's been no complaint filed with us. We haven't received any official complaint. I checked with them just as, you know, like at 3 o'clock today, just to make sure, and it was a no. Yeah,
it was at 1:06 today, but yes, okay. This afternoon. So sorry, I was asking you a question I knew the answer to, but I think it's important that certainly we've heard about a Title VI complaint, and you reached out this afternoon, and as we understand, there is no process or complaint underway. So whether we have a Title VI attorney or representative, I think that's another issue, and I think Councilmember Ortega for bringing that up. I think that's beyond this particular plan and discussion tonight, but I do support her concern. How many public meetings did you hold for the East Central Area Plan?
Well, with your help included in that final push when we did that extension to get more underrepresented residents, we're over 100. I don't know the exact number, but I know it's over 100.
Okay, yeah, it's good to get a sense of the size of those meetings. How many of them did someone request interpretation or translation services?
I don't believe, and I can check with I don't believe anyone ever requested it. And even though all of our community workshops, we did invest quite a bit of resources into making sure that we had professional interpreters available at all of them. And we sent out, all of our outreach materials in both English and Spanish. We didn't get people taking advantage of those at those meetings. And I think that's in part due, it wasn't really surprising because when we're doing our research and we're setting up our community engagement plan in the beginning of the process, we were looking at the demographics of the East Central area, and the percentage of limited English to non-English speakers is quite low in the East Central area. It ranges from anywhere from 0% in Congress Park to around 2% as a high in City Park West, I believe. So it's really around 1% average in the whole East Central plan. That's different from other plans we do in the West area plan, or the outreach we're doing out in East Colfax, where we have participants from 5 or 6 different languages in the meeting simultaneously, and we provide those services. I know in the far Northeast plan, Councilwoman Gilmore had really great relations with many of the Spanish speakers and Latino community up there, and so we had more participants up there, but we didn't see it as much in the East Central area.
Yeah, so thank you for that, and just for some of the demographics, because someone asked, and the response was 82%. It's actually on page 2, the basic. I mean, the page 1's the title page, and then page 2 is the basic demographics. And this is a very Caucasian district. So 79% or 78.8% are Caucasian or white in the plan area, and that's very close to the demographics of District 10 too. So about 9 or 9.5% Latino, but many of those are English speaking or maybe bilingual, and there are very few. I know that I've not had any concerns with any of my town halls or outreach about native Spanish translation or translation into any other language, but I certainly am willing to accommodate it should it be necessary. So I want to talk about, so speaking of, a bit of diversity. So again, this is a pretty white plan. Can you give, but there, as you mentioned, there's diversity in other ways. Ms. Robinson mentioned that 70% of the plan area is renter occupied. Do you know where the highest concentration of owner occupied? Where's that 30%?
I believe the highest concentration of owner occupied is in Congress Park, and the southern portion of Congress Park.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. So let's take a snapshot. So draft 1 was released in November of 2019, I believe, and then in February of 2020, I think you and I did a check of where the data elements, the data that we had received so far, do you know where the majority of data points were from at that point?
Yeah, and Scott can confirm this, but I recall we had a disproportionate at that point in the process. We had a disproportionately high number of comments and participants from Congress Park, from the Congress Park neighborhood.
I want to say, for some reason, the number 65% sticks in my head. That 65% of the responses or the data points were from Congress Park, and particular South Congress Park. So I guess the conclusion I'm trying to draw here is that, in some ways it makes sense, but the people who were homeowners in single-family homes really overrepresented the demographics in February. I guess, do you think that that's a reasonable comment?
That's right. I mean, that's the other side of the coin of the underrepresented population that we tried to target. Was we had overrepresentation in the opposite area. Yep.
Yeah, and that's also what I was trying to get at. You mentioned even today that that the lower income renters and younger folks were underrepresented. If you're also looking at page 2, the vast majority of the district, I mean the majority of the district is millennial, right? So between 25 and 34, there's a huge spike. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, generally the East Central area is younger, and again, a huge majority renter.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's important just that in context, in that you did mention that you did some specific targeted outreach, and you mentioned Capitol Hill. I think where I'm trying to go with this is you reached out to Capitol Hill because it wasn't because Capitol Hill was the only data point you were trying to get. It was you got a whole bunch of data points from other areas, and you were trying to create a more representative set of data based on, as you mentioned, the census data. So the next thing I want to ask about is reach. I think that you had mentioned 10,000 data points for Ecap at this point. Is that right? I could be wrong.
Yeah, over 10,000.
And do you know how many data points Blueprint got?
I remember looking at this at some point a while back, but I remember when I looked at the numbers that were in East Central versus Blueprint Denver, as they were comparable. I don't know the exact number, but it was surprising to me that we had almost the same level of outreach.
And Blueprint's a citywide plan that, I mean, the 78 neighborhoods, it covers all 78 neighborhoods, right? And this is only 6 neighborhoods.
Right.
So I just seems kudos to you, I guess, is where I'm going with the amount of outreach for this plan is on par with the citywide plan. Yeah, it is just 6 neighborhoods. The last thing that I wanted to ask about was affordable housing. So I hear some concerns about affordable housing, yet as we heard in the testimony earlier tonight, we have so many affordable housing providers who have spoken out in support of the East Central Area Plan. Can you help me understand how this plan provides benefits for affordable housing where the market rate providers may not have certain benefits?
Yeah, I mean, so this is one of this is a plan where we looked at this question pretty intensely. We created an entire chapter, which was a little different than other plans we had done previously, that was all about affordable housing. So we have a number of recommendations, both zoning related and non-zoning related. Again, in that partnership we had with Host and Nest and other organizations, we did focus groups with affordable housing developers. And we really have a robust package of policies and recommendations to look at affordable housing. And I think the one that has gotten the most attention in community feedback has been the one around zoning. And what we've done, as I tried to explain earlier, is with this recommendation that says you must provide community benefits if you want to be able to develop higher and more dense, and the priority is affordable housing, I think what that does is it gives an advantage to developers that build affordable housing. So affordable housing developers are now at more of an advantage because all of these properties have an incentive to build affordable housing and a disincentive to not build affordable housing. So if you're affordable housing, if your job is to build affordable housing, generally you're supportive of this plan, which is why I think you see that the testimony.
And then, so Telluride, the Telluride decision, I would admit I am a little, I would like for there to be more affordable housing discussions. Homelessness is the biggest issue facing District 10, and the best way to help with homelessness is to provide them homes. And so, the Telluride decision is a state law that prevents any political subdivision from allowing rent control. And in the year 2000, the Colorado State Supreme Court decided that any requirement of workforce housing is considered a form of rent control. And so there was legislation introduced in the state legislature this year. COVID mixed things up, but let's say that in 2021, the folks in the General Assembly, they pass something that allows us to require affordable housing in all developments. How does that fit into the East Central Area Plan? Will we have to start over, or will that plug into what we've created so far?
Absolutely. I mean, what would result from that would just be more affordable housing, right? So what we've done this really thoughtful research, especially along Colfax, really a lot by lot analysis where we applied criteria on which lots would be most appropriate to add additional density or additional height, and which should be preserved from a historic preservation standpoint or just an urban design standpoint. And we really went through that lot by lot analysis and created a very detailed plan of areas what we want to preserve and this balance of growth and preservation, which is why I think you see the testimony tonight from Historic Denver and others who want to see more housing both support the plan. Is that if additional tools like state laws change, that's just going to accelerate and help us meet those housing goals even more than the tools that we have provided. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, and I apologize. I have one other question. We've gotten some feedback today from a registered neighborhood organization that they're frustrated that their entire RNO was not included in the plan boundaries. Can you help me identify what the plan area is? I'm assuming statistical name. Actually, this is a question I know the answer to, and I'm trying to get you to give me the answer anyway. So let me be a little blunter. The plan area, we chose statistical neighborhoods, right? As the boundaries, we chose 6 statistical neighborhoods. Why did you, or the city, or whoever, the powers that be, choose statistical neighborhoods as a boundary as opposed to registered neighborhood organizations as a boundary?
Yeah, so we get this question from time to time, and those statistical neighborhood boundaries were established in the 1970s. They align with census tracts. The city's been using those statistical neighborhood boundaries to track demographic change over the years. And as you know, RNOs basically determine their own boundaries. And so for those reasons, we use the statistical boundaries as a way to make sure we're being consistent. We have a basis of research and understanding an area over time. So
the statistical boundaries survive through rezonings, through rezonings too, but through RNOs as they come and go. And we're about to do a remapping of our city council districts, but the statistical neighborhood remains the same even through those reapportionment processes too, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Madam President.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Hines. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to ask Scott simply because I emailed him earlier today in the interest of giving staff adequate time to actually answer a question with preparation. But it would help me very much in analyzing this. It was enough to read through the plan itself, but it supplants 4 existing neighborhood plans. I think it's Uptown, what are they? Uptown, Capitol Hill, Cheeseman Park, Congress Park, and the East Colfax plans. It would really help me analyze this if I better understood in what ways are we perhaps radically changing those existing plans to something else, and in what ways are we keeping or retaining some of the elements of those existing plans. But that would help me understand how much change these neighborhoods might reasonably expect over the next 20 years with Ecap. So Scott, did I give you enough time to look up or to analyze that question?
Yes, yeah, and thank you for sending that to us earlier. That's much appreciated. And it's a great question. One of the first things we did in this planning process was read through those existing plans and evaluate each one of the recommendations in those plans of whether it was still relevant or not. Whether it already been completed or just things that changed and no longer made sense. All of them into the new plan, but a lot of these plans are fairly old, including the Uptown Neighborhood Plan, which is 34 years old now. And these neighborhoods were in a very different situation when a lot of these plans were written in the 80s and 90s than they are today. So a lot of the recommendations just didn't make sense. Back then, there was a lot of concern about encouraging reinvestment in these neighborhoods, that these neighborhoods had seen sort of disinvestment over the recent years. And there's concern about how do we get people to move into these neighborhoods and spend money in these neighborhoods. And as we know, that's not the issue we're facing today. We're facing basically the opposite issue, that we have a lot of people that want to live in these neighborhoods and not enough housing. And these old plans didn't really deal with affordable housing at all. And as we talked about tonight, affordable housing is a major component of these neighborhood plan, or the new neighborhood plan. And that's just one example. So the East Central Area Plan is significantly different than what these old plans had. But that, I think, reflects how the city has evolved over the last 25 to 35 years.
Do you recall offhand of those 4 plans, how old were each of those? Like Uptown, when was that?
Yeah, Uptown was 1986.
86?
86, yes.
Yeah, that's before Councilman Hines was born, I think. And he lives there now.
The Capitol Hill Cheeseman Park Plan is 1993, I believe. The Congress Park Plan is 1995, and the East Colfax Plan is 2004, I believe.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to ask, well, the other question I emailed you has already been addressed here, and that was about the ethnic and racial makeup of the steering committee, and I hear that you addressed that earlier. So thank you, or maybe Kurt did. I don't know who's best to address this last question I have, maybe Kurt. We've talked about a lot about affordable housing. I'm still a little unclear on how this plan incentivizes it. What I see is encouragement, actually maybe discouragement, that's the wrong way to say it, encouragement not to demolish. And I don't know, that's a double negative or something, in order to add units to existing properties as opposed to scraping. I know we love to throw around this term gentle density. I look at gentle density as displacing you with a smile, because the neighborhoods where I've seen it happen, my aide, Dana Montano, bought her grandmother's house when she and Albert were married, her now late husband, sold it off in the 90s. And we looked that up recently. It's in Villa Park. And it was valued by the assessor the last time in 2016 at $169,900. It was bought and demolished a year later for almost $300,000, replaced with duplex units that each sell for about $600,000. So like Councilwoman Black and some other members, I have a concern that that we keep doing these things thinking that it'll produce one result, yet they keep producing the other. Resolving Telluride, as Councilman Hines mentioned, won't solve that problem because this is private investors building new housing, selling it on the open market. So I worry about this gentle density. So how does ECAP do a better job at encouraging affordability? I read through and I saw the, maybe we can relax the bulk plane requirements or rear setbacks to discourage demolition. Is that it? What else is in this plan that will actually accomplish this goal?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Councilman Flynn. I mean, like I said before, there's a number of recommendations. We have a whole affordable housing section of the plan that gets into things like trying to prevent the expiration of covenants and more of those programmatic recommendations. But to your specific point about the gentle density or the infill housing density, it's again a small portion of the East Central area that recommendation applies to. But in our partnership with Historic Denver and Discover Denver through this process, we have a Discover Denver survey, so that we surveyed all of these neighborhoods for historical significance, and the single unit areas where that recommendation would apply are historically significant. And so for multiple reasons, not for the reasons you said, which we agree with, and has been a point of view that's shared through our process about demolishing smaller bungalows and replacing them with larger, monster, like maximize every square inch of the zoning that you have. We explicitly have said in our policy that that's not what we should be encouraging, right? That's not the outcome we want to happen. And the recommendation says that if additional housing units are added in these areas, you actually have to preserve the existing structure if it's historically significant. And all these areas where this would apply are historically significant. Okay. So that's the approach, is it's encouraging a preservation, and it's discouraging that scrape and, the sort of McMansion style homes.
Right.
All right. And we also have, if I could just jump in for a second, we also have more specific recommendations about encouraging programs to provide dedicated affordable housing when these new units are added. So if you look at recommendation E11 in the plan, it has recommendations specifically about if missing middle is built into these neighborhoods, look at programs that can help them get built, and then as part of that help, requiring affordability in those new units.
All right, I will look at that while the rest of the debate goes on. E11. Thank you, Madam President. That's all I have at the moment.
All right, thank you, Councilman Flynn. Councilman Hines, you're back up.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Upton, people keep moving to Denver. Does ECAP discourage people moving to this plan area?
No, I think it balance, again, we come up with a balanced approach to allowing for the projected growth. So one of the first things we did was we looked at the 2040 DRCOG housing and job projections, and we made sure that the land use recommendations could accommodate those housing and job projections, and while still putting into place policies to address that housing shortage that we have, especially at the lower income levels, and trying to balance that with historic preservation. So that was kind of that balanced approach that we took.
So a lot of people are moving to Denver because of jobs, because we've gained a lot of jobs, and because of access to outdoor activities. Does or can ECAP discourage people moving here for jobs or outdoor activities?
No.
Okay. And then what about in 2020, we've got people moving here from the coast because they're climate refugees. The West Coast is on fire and is flooding, and the East Coast is there anything in the Eastern Area Plan that discourages people to move into the 6 neighborhoods because of global warming?
I don't think so.
So I guess, so if we have people moving to Denver for a whole bunch of reasons, does that affect housing affordability?
Yeah, like I previously mentioned, it's something that we look at and making sure that housing supply is keeping pace with the number of population moving to Denver.
Yeah, I'm not trying to, I guess I'm not trying to be critical of you. I'm trying to say it's very difficult for us when we have a perfect place to live and people really want to live here. And so, if we could keep the factors just to the people who are existing in the East Central Area Plan and not have anyone else move to the area, I think we could perhaps tackle housing affordability a little bit better than when we have a whole bunch of people moving here because it's a perfect slice of our planet. Thank you, Madam President.
All right, thank you, Councilman Hines. I have one remaining question. My other questions were asked by my colleagues, either Kurt or Scott. Are any of the bus rapid transit plans, are they funded or will they be funded in 2021?
So we do have Dottie staff if you want to get into specifics, but it's my understanding that the next phase of the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project is funded through general obligation bond funding. They're moving forward with that project and advancing the phase. And I think Mike Gill is on the call if you have any follow-ups or want more specifics on that. He's the in charge of that project.
Okay. You know what? We'll go ahead. Just as long as we know that you're considering something, and I'm not seeing him raise his hand right now. So, oh, there we go. Mike, do you want to go ahead and chime in?
Yeah, I missed a little bit of the conversation when I was being promoted, but the question was around the next phase of the BRT. We do have about $5 million in CIP funds from previous years, as well as $55 million in the 2017 GO bond that's available for this next phase. And that's what we're moving forward with our NEPA clearance and the design phase.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was the question I wanted answered. So thank you. The public hearing for Council Bill 20-0930 is closed. Comments by members of council. Councilman Hines.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to open my comments by thanking everyone who's still here, because this is obviously a long conversation, but this is an important conversation. But I also want to thank Councilman Cashman. When I was elected, he was quoted as calling me an urbanist. If only I had known that word before I was elected, I definitely would have used it. So to me, urbanism is about having places where people want to be and having places where people want to go. I talked a lot about the concept of a 20-minute neighborhood. Basically, we all deserve the opportunity to be close to things we need to survive and thrive, all within a 20-minute walk, ride, or roll, as in no cars. We live in the real world, not Narnia, but I still think that District 10 is pretty darn perfect. Much of what makes District 10 so perfect is that we're a slice of the city where people want to live, work, and play. I've lived in the East Central Area Plan boundary since 2007, and I personally followed this plan since before I was a candidate. I sat on Blueprint representing Central Denver for a while, and so the East Central Area Plan was a natural extension. Obviously, my role now is different than in 2017, but I definitely had a long view of the process. Ecap extends Blueprint Denver and pushes that concept of the 20-minute neighborhood further to the forefront. It means adding reasonable density where it makes sense, like Colfax as an example, and limiting additional density where it doesn't make sense, like, for example, in South Congress Park. It also means reducing or eliminating certain areas of proposed additional density. As an example, the plan had at one time a proposed additional density around the businesses in Congress Park. And after hearing from the neighbors, those proposed additional density areas were removed because it was clear that's not what the neighbors wanted. So as you've heard, this plan has been endorsed by numerous organizations, including YIMBY Denver, Denver Streets Partnership, Colfax and Bluebird Bids, Neighborhood Development Collaborative, including their 15 affordable housing and social service providers, and Historic Denver. These are very different organizations with different priorities, yet this plan finds a way to appeal to each of them. There are elements there are elements in the planet supporting local businesses, housing affordability, addressing homelessness, Vision Zero, and historic preservation. Again, just one example, 54% of Congress Park's homes were built before 1940. And this plan encourages preserving those buildings to preserve the character of the neighborhood. This includes encouraging more historic districts, creating adaptive reuse ordinances to encourage reuse of a building rather than a scrape. And it even encourages expanding private property rights for people with historic homes so that they can make better use of their own property. The intent is to provide additional tools to preserve our city's character rather than demolish it for the next McMansion. District 10 and Ecap has some of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, and I'm glad that Ecap helps the city and property owners preserve that beauty, even if it's in Capitol Hill, Cheeseman, or Congress Park. I do want to provide two cautions for Ecap. Just like most everyone else, this isn't exactly what I wanted either. First, I wish there were more affordable housing in the plan. Still, this isn't really, I don't believe, a problem with the plan. It's more to do with the laws that handcuff our ability to require affordable housing. State legislation was introduced in 2020 to reverse the Telluride decision, but COVID decided to upend that bill along with lots of others. I continue to encourage everyone to contact our state legislators to ask them to reverse Telluride and to give us, all political subdivisions, including Denver, the tools we need to do what is clearly demanded by the people of Denver. Second, I'm saddened by the amount of misinformation that surrounds this plan. We've talked about this before as a council, and I want to bring it up again for this discussion. Right now, Denver law says RNOs are the way we should communicate with the people and the way people should respond. It's clear that communication process needs improvement, and it is no more front and center than with the East Central Area Plan. Here's a troubling point. We've got, all of us have received a bunch of email in the last 24 hours, and about half of them that I analyzed don't even live in the plan area. It's troubling for two reasons. First, because they believe they're in the plan area. After all, they signed it saying that they were East Central Area Plan resident, but they're not. Second, there are maps of the plan area on pages 2, 3, 4, 10, 13, 14, 16, 17, twice on page 18, and all over the East Central Area Plan document. And if you prefer words instead of images, you don't have to read beyond the first sentence of the first page to get the list of included neighborhoods. So it suggests that people are taking positions without even looking at the plan at all. That's okay if the information people are using to base their position is accurate and if the process is transparent. I'm not certain that is the case. So one of the things that we did, we as in the District 10 office, is we assisted that conversation between government and its people. I asked CPD to delay the plan process. I didn't just ask for the delay without doing anything. We dedicated 100% one of the team in District 10's office to the East Central Area Plan outreach. We flyered thousands of residents. We partnered with property management companies who sent emails to their renters about East Central Area Plan. We held 14 additional community events and several train the trainer events too. Some of our events had a few people, and one presentation had more than 150 people. There was so much outreach that my office had a scheduled event at Bang Up to the Elephant in Cap Hill, and unknown to us, one of our trainers also had an East Central Area Plan program at the exact same time and the exact same venue. As I understand it, the outreach more than doubled the data points thanks to that extra 30-day extension, and more importantly, increased responses in areas that were underrepresented before our outreach. 83% of this plan houses District 10 residents. I want to thank them sincerely for their time and their fair consideration of others' interests, not just their own, when it comes to the future of our beautiful city. It takes courage to change our approach to the land use, transportation, and climate as we move forward. I want to thank the steering committee members for their time, as I don't think anyone received 100% of what they wanted throughout this process. I also want to thank my team. We augmented city staff and RNOs with outreach, and I want to thank all of them for the extra work and stress during this process. I believe it is a strong plan thanks to CPD with help from so many other stakeholders, and I urge a yes vote for my colleagues. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Said-Abaka.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I'd like to thank everybody, Scott, Kurt, everyone else in CPD who put an endless amount of time into seeking input, including you, Councilman Chris, Councilman Hines. I appreciate all of that. And as much as input is important, all the input in the world doesn't matter if we don't heed the recommendations and deal with the concerns that people raise. I personally really love the adaptive reuse and change of use elements and the historic preservation pieces of the plan. And I want to thank Kurt for acknowledging that I was the only person of color on the steering committee after inheriting Councilman Brooks' seat. While the makeup of the steering committee was very disturbing, they were appointed largely by my predecessor, and fortunate for me, Frank Locantor was very graceful in addressing several instances of inappropriate comments around race and class from other steering committee members. So a huge thank you to Frank for helping in that way. As the only person of color on the steering committee for the tail end, responding to the articulated plan, I was extremely disturbed to have had a conversation in our very last meeting where we had to literally define social equity because not all of the members of the committee had heard of the words or their meaning. We had several moments where I had to challenge committee members on comments about affordable housing not being an appropriate community benefit because it would bring down property values, and comments that we needed to clean up the seedy parts of Colfax. I'm very frustrated by things mentioned by several other speakers tonight, including Miles, Ms. Camacho, and Joe. Miles brought up the BRT traffic modeling, the design, the parking, the walking and density studies that they requested, and the alternate BRT stops that were never really included. But this whole plan was catalyzed by BRT. So I felt like not blending those two things together the way that members were asking for it to be blended was problematic. I wish that we were having separate conversations about the mobility and safety component, because from the few meetings that I was able to attend pre-COVID, most residents, especially the frustrated ones, they didn't appreciate tackling the potential for upcoming density with the needed safety street measures and bike lanes. And so I wish those were separate, and I support a lot of those elements in the plan. But our office had over 620 residents voice their opposition to this plan. I think we need to be really careful about believing that we'll be able to meet our missing middle needs with a plan that doesn't explicitly define housing needs that must be met. The height incentives are even looser here in this plan than they were in the height incentives in the 38th and Blake overlay. And those incentives didn't yield any affordability. Everywhere in my district on the south side of Colfax, on the north side of Colfax, is proof that more density doesn't equal affordability. While many of the neighborhoods in District 10 haven't had neighborhood plans in as many years as I am old, my district happens to have almost all of our neighborhoods have a neighborhood plan, and they're relatively recent. And what we know is that first comes the plan, then comes the rapid displacement and gentrification. And so I want us to be very cautious about that. Incentives without a mechanism to actualize affordability will once again open the doors to rampant development and accelerated displacement, particularly for the 70% of renters in this corridor. With the majority of the area relying on benevolent landlords to maintain affordability, I'm very concerned about how rapidly land speculators will pounce on the opportunities presented for massive redevelopment along this corridor, as long as they include community benefits, community benefits that could range from parks, a swimming pool for the elite, to affordable housing for those who actually need it. I'd love to believe that the high incentives open the market for affordable housing developers, as mentioned, but the price of land is the first barrier to any benevolent builder. This plan exponentially increases the value of land along the corridor with 7 votes and nothing else. For those reasons, I can't support this plan as it stands without firming up our expectations for affordable housing development and defining in the plan what our priorities are around community benefits. So with that, I'm a no tonight. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Up next, we have Councilwoman Black.
Thanks, Madam President, and thank you, Councilwoman Sadabaca and Councilman Hines, for your great comments. I just have a few things to say. One is that although most of you know I am a lifelong resident of Southeast Denver, I actually was born in the East Central Area Plan area at St. Joseph's Hospital many, 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 many years ago. So in my district, unlike yours, Councilwoman Sadabaca, we do not have one neighborhood plan ever in the history of Southeast Denver. So I have been pushing for a long time for some plans in my district. And so when we have one in my district, I want it to be more like the far Northeast area plan, where everyone came to our council meeting to tell us how much they loved it. So this controversy with this one is really troubling me. And so I just want to express my concerns to CPD as we move forward with future area plans. I don't like this controversy. I think it makes us all feel really uncomfortable. I feel like we need to listen to all of our residents. And right now, I feel like we're having a war between NIMBYs and YIMBYs. And I feel like there's got to be a middle ground somewhere. So I hope moving forward, we can find a middle ground, that more people are happy with what we're doing. I also have concerns that our areas are too big. They're massive. I know we're trying to do a lot in a relatively short amount of time, even though it's going to be more than a decade. But these areas they're just so completely different. Every neighborhood within the plan is so unique and so different. And I think that's part of the reason we're seeing the disagreement and the controversy that we're seeing tonight. I don't know if there's a way we can divide them up some more, but I do think that that's going to end up having more opposition as we move forward. I also am concerned, I mentioned this earlier, that there are too many CPD efforts going on and they're siloed. I think we need to talk about all of them together with our community members so they understand everything that we're doing and they don't just hear about one thing and they get comfortable with that, and then lo and behold something else pops up and they're like, well, but you didn't tell me about that one. So I do have concerns about that. We can talk about it later. And as I think most of us mentioned tonight, we have concerns that density results in affordability when that's not what we've seen at all in Denver. So that's something else I have huge concerns about. I will be supporting this. I feel like there is overwhelming support for it. I appreciate Councilman Hines. It's predominantly in his district, and he's an enthusiastic supporter of it. And I will be supporting it, and I look forward, CPD, with working with you on the near Southeast area plan, which a tiny part of it is in my district. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam President. I also want to thank everyone, the staff and steering committee and community members, and especially the council members who participated in the process. These plans are incredibly time consuming and a really complex task full of trade-offs and tough conversations. So I really appreciate the hard work that went into this. And I think, you know, no matter whether you're a supporter of this plan or not, I really admire the dedication of the group of people who came together to get this done and what they've accomplished over the last 3 years. So I think this is a tough decision. I think from the testimony that I heard tonight, some of the community is voicing its frustration really with the process. And based on my own personal experience in the area, you know, in the East Area Plan, you know, I can understand that concern. I can understand that frustration. This is the first area plan to go through in an area that was already settled, because the Far Northeast plan was adopted. Yeah, it was adopted a year and a half ago, but that plan covers an area that was largely undeveloped. And so it had different challenges, I think, and broad community support, certainly much broader community support than this one. So I think this plan and the East Area Plan are different because they're the first plans that are involving neighborhoods that are fully built out and where there are people who are already there. And there are some tough lessons that were learned by CPD in the process around these plans that are just sort of a different situation than that first plan. But I really appreciate that CPD took the time to slow down and, you know, really re-engage the community in partnership with the council office and ensure broader and more thoughtful engagement in the community. We've heard a lot of testimony about how different organizations, especially District 10 Council Office and CPD, some of the neighborhood organizations steering committee, worked hard over the last year to bring awareness of the plan to the community, particularly to the renters who hadn't previously heard about it. And I think to our, you know, community of residents who are experiencing homelessness, which is incredible. I mean, that's unheard of in the city and county of Denver. And I'm not sure that we have really celebrated that enough tonight. I'm not sure that we've really taken a moment to celebrate that enough tonight. Think about what we just said. When has that ever been done before in the history of the city and county of Denver? That's amazing. And say what you will about this plan, the fact that that was done is really incredible. And you guys should all be incredibly proud of yourselves that you were a part of that, because that is a big deal. And I just don't think that we really stopped tonight to think about that for a second. So I just want to really make sure that we do that for a minute here and celebrate that, because it needs to be celebrated, because that's really important that we took the extra time and the extra thought to be inclusive, because that should have been happening this entire time and it wasn't. And so thanks for doing that. And I think it's really important to recognize, you know, this wasn't some backroom process that was secretive and created only by the wealthy and well-connected. You know, I think one of the things we as council members hear so often is that, you know, backroom deals happen and things are done and we find out about it later as community members. That's not what happened here. And that's really amazing and really important. So, you know, I talk all the time about how I truly believe that under the principles of Comp Plan 2040 and Blueprint 2019, all of our neighborhoods are better off with a plan than without a plan. But really the question is this the right plan? Does this plan achieve its purposes, right? Because no plan is perfect, but is this plan, you know, does it do what we need it to do? And of course, we all wish that the neighborhood plans went further to guarantee affordability. You know, Telluride severely limits us. And so I also want to just please put out there to everyone and anyone in the state who is listening right now, please, Telluride has got to go. It is crushing us, and we will live with, you know, this missing middle for a very, very long time, and the consequences of Telluride for a very, very long time, because we've lived with it for 20 years and it's ridiculous. So, you know, everyone on the state, please, this has got to be fixed. But I digress. Thoughtful development doesn't mean no development. I say that all the time. Our city is going to grow because cities that don't grow die, and that's not what we want, right? But we've got to grow in a way that makes sense. And so the question is, does this plan make sense? And I think the answer is it's not perfect, but it does. It focuses growth along the Colfax corridor where it belongs. And where those additional residents can help support our local businesses. So that makes sense. No one is going to get everything that they want when it comes to these plans, and everyone has to give. And that means no one's going to be completely happy with how the plan has turned out. Everyone's a little disappointed and everyone's a little mad, and that's probably the way it should be. And from what I heard tonight, that's kind of what I wanted to hear. That's a signal of success. Some people telling us that there isn't enough density in the plan. Some people testifying that there's too much development and density in the plan. To me, that's indicative that we have found a good middle ground. And that's an indication that we are sort of where we should be with this plan. And so that means that I will be supporting it tonight. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Cashman.
Thank you, Madam President. There's enough in the principles and the process of this plan for me to support it. However, I agree with Councilwoman Sedabaka that I'm not comfortable that we really do have the techniques in place to prevent displacement or to guarantee affordable housing emerges out of this plan. And so I just urge us to keep our shoulder to the wheel to find those tools. And while I support what's been said about the need for changes to give us more flexibility in affordability, lacking those tools, we need to figure this out. So I would continue to look in that direction. I think the outreach budget needs to be larger. I believe it's been a substantial effort. And that said, I know some of the people who've testified tonight that were dissatisfied with that process. And they're people I respect. So I believe there were some holes that can be patched. I think that is very frequently the case. And again, we need to keep trying to figure that out. As Councilman Hines brought up, the way we send out information into the community and the way we expect the community to respond to us is a bit of a piece of Swiss cheese. And again, it has holes that need to be patched, and we need to get that done. As far as one part of the process that I wanted to look at is, having been a journalist for a long time, I would write articles about processes like this that unfold over a period of years. And inevitably, when the bulldozers are at the door, people are, I never heard about this. No one ever told me about this. I think we need to recognize that that is a fact of life. And so when we get to that last stage where we're ready to go, then we need to put on the brakes as a matter of part of that process and understand we need more time. At that last stage, we need to put out another blast and let people know, hey, the bulldozers are here. Here's what's going on, and give it that one last time for public input. That said, I thank the staff. I thank the hundreds of neighbors who participated and lent their ideas. I feel for those who don't feel that they were heard, and that's always a tough piece of this. But as I said at the beginning, I think I'm hearing enough about the process and the principles that I can give this my support. And being one of the next council people up for the near southeast plan that will begin, it looks like, early next year, I'll be looking to do my best to help fill those blanks that need to be filled. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. Some of my comments have been made by my colleagues on both sides of this issue. I also would like to say thank you to our staff from CPD, Kurt and Scott, and the consultants that worked with you, and all of the neighbors who participated and gave input on all sides of this issue. We received quite a bit of email communications from both sides on this issue, and I've tried to listen intently. I had not taken a position one way or the other until listening to all the input here tonight. I appreciate the concerted effort to include the historic preservation component. I think that's important in trying to recognize the value of some of our historic structures that we have throughout our city, and without speaking to it and including it in our plans, it doesn't always happen. I also appreciate the inclusion of NEST into the conversation about how do we move forward to include displacement measures to ensure that development doesn't always equal displacement and gentrification. As we had heard about concerns about outreach to some of our minority populations that have language differences, I think it is critical that we always adhere to following the Title VI guidelines. I would appreciate if we get a copy of the response that the Federal Transit Administration sent back to RTD. And I heard that that does exist. So I think it would be helpful for us to see that. Lastly, the conversation about the fact that CPD is already engaged in discussion about looking at base heights as one of the levers, if you will, that can be used to address, where we can include affordability, which is different from Telluride. I think council needs to be included in that conversation. It can't just be a CPD discussion. I think we need to have some input into that before it's a final product that's brought to us for adoption, assuming that includes, approval by council. But I think we would all want to have some input into looking at that and sharing our thoughts and feedback before anything is finalized, whether it includes council input or not. And I just think that this has had a lot of input on all sides. And I am concerned that we were not able to accommodate Ms. Camacho, just knowing there was a Title VI complaint filed around language issues. And somehow we should have been alerted so that we could have accommodated ensuring that her voice was heard as she shared it with us. And I appreciate that Councilwoman Sedibaka, tried to interpret what she was saying for us. And, I know at the end, she asked the question about how are we ensuring that we are covering language as one of the things. And I did hear from our staff that that was accommodated, but I also heard from the community that on the front end of the process, it took people speaking to that issue on multiple occasions before some of the materials started getting copied, in Spanish and English, before there were interpreters accommodated at some of the meetings. And I think this just needs to be our norm moving forward on any neighborhood plans, where we identify what specific languages are needed to incorporate the materials and to find the right people to help ensuring that we're capturing the voice of those communities where needed. I will be supporting this tonight. I think there's a lot of work that's gone into this. I attended at least 2 meetings in the community where the East Central Area Plan was discussed. And, you know, I saw that the staff was listening intently, whether everybody's input was folded into every component. You know, that doesn't always happen, but I think this is one that looks like it has that balance to it. And so I will be supporting it tonight. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Torres?
Thank you so much. Just want to thank the team at CPD and particularly the council offices of Councilwoman Cedabaca and Hines. It really does take that partnership with those offices. I know I'm heavily involved in my own area plan, and we're still working our way through some similar issues of reach. You know, feeling like you can fully inform 50,000 people in a constantly changing city is a really difficult task. So I thank you for 3 years of that effort and really being able to show that you made some really diligent outreach. It takes that depth, the resources and time that everyone put into this. Our most important working council is land use, and it always comes back to plan compliance, so that these plans really speak to what a neighborhood wants at the end of the day and what they want to see their community grow into is really difficult to come to a singular decision about. So I appreciate the hard work that you all put into it. I will be supporting tonight and just want to thank all the folks who have been involved, the duration of the project, but even those who came in at any point during that period of time and tried to come up to speed. It is lengthy. It is a huge document. It is complex and sometimes hard to see how does it affect my home and my property and my family. And sometimes in the face of that, it just creates resistance. And we have a lot of resistant communities and neighborhoods and homeowners in this city. And we've got to be willing to be adaptable for a greater good. So thank you to CPD and to my colleagues. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Torres. And I'll go ahead and add my comments. You know, the Far Northeast plan has been referenced a few times, and I have to say myself and Councilman Herndon, we were relentless in pushing back and asking CPD, you know, when they said we want 15 members on the steering committee, we went back and forth, and I think we got up to either 18 or 20 members on the steering committee, and that it's how you're welcoming and engaging folks. And, you know, Kurt and Scott and your team, I want to thank you for the work that you've put into this, and also Councilman Hines and Councilwoman Cedabaca. But you also need to have the representation. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have more people of color engaged in this process. And unfortunately, we're starting to see a pattern, I think, with CPD and the engagement, that it's not where we need it to be. It's not where community wants it to be. You've got to build that trust with folks. And even for some of the monolingual folks that we had on the steering committee, I believe we even had some that shared a position, so that we weren't taking up individuals' time unnecessarily, that they could kind of tag team it, and that we could get more outreach that way. And everything was always translated. Even if my council office had to do the translation, we translated it because it was that important, that we knew we needed to have that. And so we were going to go that extra step. And so I would just ask that CPD really reevaluate how you're authentically engaging with community. And if you have one person of color and that is the elected council person for that area, that's not good enough. That's a point where there should be a pause and there should be a recalibration. And I understand that this process has been going on for 3 years and there's been engagement, and there's about 70% of the folks that live in this area are renters, but we've got to up our game as a city and be more responsive to what those in our community who maybe don't have the privilege and the power to push their way in the door, we've got to open up that door and make sure that it's the right door that they want to come through, and continue to do that over and over and over again. And I know a lot of times in the Far Northeast plan, I'm sure our planners were like, she's overdoing it. They're doing too much. But that's the work that we did. And that's why I believe we didn't have a big pushback and it wasn't contentious, because we did that work up front. And I appreciate, all the community members that spoke, and even in favor and in opposition. I'm glad that we were able to hear you and the comments of my colleagues tonight as well. And I'm going to support this because there's been 3 years worth of work put into this and thousands and thousands of comments. But I also want to really point out the deficits that we're continuing to see and hear from CPD. And I'm not blaming the particular members that presented tonight. I think that this is indicative of a larger conversation that needs to be had amongst CPD staff and administration to make sure that we're truly getting this right, because this can make or break a neighborhood. And the one thing I would say, Councilman Hines and Councilwoman Seda Baca, there's going to be parts of this plan that you're going to have to go to bat on, that maybe CPD planners are trying to do something or shape something, and it's not the intent of the community. And we've had occurrences of that. And so we've had to go back and kind of call the bluff on it. Is that really what the community said? Or did the community say that because they were trying to get to a different outcome, not more of the same, and to really have those conversations? And so I will be supporting it tonight, but not without a bit of frustration and also sadness that we're at this point in the city around equity, and we're still, unfortunately, having some of these same conversations. Madam Secretary, roll call.
Black,
Aye.
Seda Baca,
No.
Clark,
Aye.
Flynn,
Aye.
Herndon,
Aye.
Hines,
Aye.
Cashman,
Aye.
Kinich,
Aye.
Ortega,
Aye.
Sawyer,
Aye.
Torres.
Aye.
Madam President.
Aye. Madam Secretary, please close the voting and announce the results.
1 nay, 11 ayes.
11 ayes. Council Bill 930 has passed. On Monday, November 2nd, Council will hold a required public hearing on Council Bill 965, changing the zoning classification for 4714 North Bryant Street in Sunnyside, and a required public hearing on Council Bill 983, changing the zoning classification for 1790 South Humboldt Street in University, and a required public hearing on Council Bill 984, changing the zoning classification for 2520 South Marion Street in University. Any protests against Council Bills 965, 983, or 984 must be filed with the council offices no later than noon on Monday, October 26th. There being no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned.